Thank you, Zach. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you all, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak to you today. I am also following a similar line in some way to the presentations this morning, and certainly to what Uncle Lewis spoke about, and that is looking at things twice from different angles. So this morning the Alan Pearson oration, Craig, Alexa, Zach and myself presented the timeline of the 20 years of the Joanna Briggs Institute. In this presentation this afternoon, I'm just going to focus in on one program of the Joanna Briggs Institute, which is certainly an important and a core program of the JBI and has been for the last 20 years, and that is its program of synthesis science and systematic review. So I'm going to take you on a little journey, take some jumps around in how we've evolved and how our synthesis has evolved, and also, importantly, where it started. But I must begin this presentation with a disclaimer. When I look around the room here today and I look at the topic that I'm speaking to, I suspect there are probably some better people in the room to be speaking to it, because I actually haven't been around since day one, but quite a few people in this room have. And I did some anecdotal and observational study and a bit of reading and research, and I asked Craig a few questions to make sure that I had all my points right and the evolution of the JBI synthesis in the earlier days right, and he assured me that I did. And then Tiffany and Zoe walked past me this morning and assured me that I didn't. So, but that's fine, because we have the luxury of time, and I know with the people in this room who can probably fill in a lot of the blanks that I missed, I do hope when I finish that you'll be able to provide some comment or some added insight to our program of synthesis and how it really evolved from day one. I know there are many people here who can do that. So for the next 25 minutes or so, I'm just going to take us right back 20 years to the scene where JBI started, the synthesis scene. And entrenched right in there, as I mentioned, synthesis science has always been a core part of what Joanna Briggs, evidence-based healthcare, and what the Institute and its work is all about, and how entrenched within the vision of the Institute and what the Institute was trying to achieve in nursing practice at that time, how that vision of academics and clinicians working together really transferred itself or helped this synthesis program evolve in the way that it did. And I think Drew Riddle spoke to a few of the key features of working together between research and practice, which really is where the birth of many of the JBI methods and methodologies came from. So beyond that vision, moving into some of the development of our synthesis, and here I'm just going to briefly focus specifically where I think still today JBI is recognised as one of the world leaders, and that is in qualitative synthesis, because you'll soon discover, for those of you who didn't know already, back then it was heresy. But now it's recognised, and JBI is recognised really as one of the world leaders in that area. And concurrent of all the goings on, I want to give you a bit of in the synthesis program itself, a snapshot of the type of reviews that were being published along the way, and also what was evolving to support reviewers. So the resources and also the avenues for publication and templates to be able to disseminate JBI research, and how that also has evolved with our program of synthesis. And then moving on to what's pushed it along the way to the point that we're at today and where the program sits. And there are still, I hope you've picked up this morning, and I know many of you are involved, there are a lot of exciting developments on the way for our program of synthesis, which I really feel, due to some decisions that were made only a handful of years ago in the Institute, that are really beginning to pay dividends in terms of how our work is recognised and how it's being used around the world. Okay, so again, this is all anecdotal. I'm talking about from what I heard, because I never lived any of this. Back in 1996, I actually didn't know what a systematic review was. I was finishing my degree and dabbling in physiology and pharmacology. But back in 1996, systematic reviews were essentially systematic reviews of randomised controlled trials. It came along with the birth of the Cochrane collaboration a few years earlier by the major protagonists David Sackett, Ian Chalmers and the like. And if you were doing a systematic review, that's what it was. And it all made perfect sense, using evidence to inform medical practice. And Alan Pearson and other nursing academics, as I understand it, looked at what was going on in medicine and said, well, that makes sense. We should be doing it in nursing practice as well. And that was really where the idea was born. But it was quite clear when I read the wonderful history book written by Zoe and the other authors, that's where the Joanna Briggs Institute was born, but right from day one, it was clear that systematic review of randomised controlled trials wasn't going to cut it. The questions that were being asked and that were relevant to nursing practice weren't always aligned to cause and effect relationships. These were issues of care, not just treatment. And so it was quite clear from the outset that they were going to go beyond systematic reviews of RCTs, and that this group here in Adelaide, and with those early centres, were going to venture out into some uncharted territory in terms of what a systematic review would be. Now, I mentioned that vision, and that the vision of the Institute has always been, we still view it today, that bridge between that world of research and the world of clinical practice. That's where the Institute sits, in between there and bringing them together. And we do that right at the end with a lot of our products in translation science, implementation science, and we present that evidence there for at the point of care, the point of reference for those, for researchers to be able to use that. But right from the beginning, and I think Drew spoke to this more eloquently than I ever could, was always that idea that they're important right here at the start, and in the schema of evidence-based practice and how it all comes together, and that is in formulating those questions. So right from the start, it was clear we're talking about what are the questions from practice. Let's go out and find all of the available evidence. And if there was no research available, then that was time to do some more research. But if there was, it was time to bring it together, synthesise it, and actually make sure that it followed its trajectory through to the bedside. But this idea that the information needs to be as complete as possible speaks back to that understanding right at the outset about what the synthesis ideology, I guess, of the Institute was beginning to embrace. And I'm trying to present this here because I know in the world of systematic reviews, when you're a systematic reviewer, terminology can be incredibly confounding. The word systematic review itself is one of the most loosely used terms, I think, in the medical literature. You could search the title systematic review in PubMed, and in your first 20 hits, you'll find a lot of things that many of us in this room would never consider a systematic review. Some of those key steps that we all look for, critical appraisal or assessment of risk of bias, are simply missing. And I think, in my understanding, I always conceptualise this. There's another place between us and similar organisations, and I will use Cochrane as the example, where we use the same words but meant different things. And when you look at what the Cochrane collaboration considered the best available evidence, well, they moved to the top of the evidence hierarchy here in the pyramid, focusing on randomised controlled trials and experimental research, and then, of course, assessing the best available was the best available of what was up there. The best available evidence when you're talking about a JBI systematic review, and has been since day one, due to the nature of what it was trying to inform, nursing practice, where there weren't that many RCTs, was to look at this hierarchy as a whole. This is the available evidence, and we'll assess which is the best or not on the basis of quality of the whole schema. And at this stage, right at the very beginning, so we were talking about here the hierarchy of including diverse study designs that previously may not have appeared in what was termed a systematic review, observational research, and even moving down to descriptive studies. But beyond that, right at the beginning, in terms of informing nursing practice, was also this idea that there was the other side of the coin that was incredibly important. And I know there are still debates. I'm always fascinated by the debates that qualitative research isn't real research. There are still people out there who believe that. But here was a group who were turning around to say that this is important work. When we talk about a randomised controlled trial is wonderful, it can tell me about safety and efficacy, but effectiveness is more about than does it just work. It's about are we using it right? And part of are we using it right can be investigated from different angles and different aspects. And some of those early JBI reviews, even before Quarry was born, to inform effectiveness did include qualitative studies for that very reason. And it's quite interesting if you go back to those early years and have a look and see how it was all handled within them. So this whole idea that there was a whole lot more research out there that could potentially inform practice that was being ignored right down this hierarchy and certainly on this other side of the coin. Now, if we take a step back, and I did this just last week because I like leaving things to the last moment, and I started looking through some of these early reviews. And you saw, and I'll show it to you again in a moment, the earliest review that, well, here it is, the first review that appeared in the JBI Library of Systematic Reviews. Now, I don't believe that's where it was first published, because the JBI Library of Systematic Reviews, I think, was created with Connect in 2006 and then was populated retrospectively. So this would have appeared in one of the other JBI journals. But if you look at this review, the very first one about falls in acute hospitals, it included 2 randomised controlled trials, a range of observational studies and descriptive studies. And you can move forward, and for the first, it was quite remarkable, for the first 20 or so systematic reviews, they were all questions, even beyond that, I beg your pardon, for 60 or so systematic reviews, they were almost all questions of effectiveness. Still about effectiveness of nursing practice and care provided by nurses and allied health, but they were still all squarely around effectiveness. Many had very broad objectives, and I'll speak to that in a moment. But when you look at the questions that they're asking and how they're presented, these reviews probably in the first 7 or 8 years of the Institute, the sort of conceptualisation of the questions and how we can approach the questions of the evidence that are available, that we're all familiar with, about feasibility, potentially we're talking about economics, or the appropriateness of a particular intervention, or meaningfulness and experience. None of that terminology is really there. I couldn't really find it. They were all focused back down here. But that's not to say that what was going on in the background wasn't certainly working towards that. And at the same time, when these first reviews of effectiveness were coming out, including different study designs, Alan Pearson and a group of nursing academics from around Australia came together with the specific aim of developing a theoretically grounded approach to appraising and synthesising the findings of qualitative studies and qualitative research. Now, I'm not going to go any further. It was grounded in the work of Edmund Searle and the American pragmatists, and I won't go any further into that discussion because it'll be very clear very quickly that I won't know what I'm talking about. And I'll leave it at that, okay? But this is where it started. And this is the part that one of the reasons whilst I, as a systematic reviewer, if you try and push me into, the world of interpretivism and really getting myself into what Searle or Heidegger and the like were talking about, I will get lost. But the group here really, because they were clear they needed a methodology for systematic review. And they knew what a systematic review was and what it was meant to be, and how to best align what was going on the qualitative side of research to what was going on the quantitative side of systematic review research. And they really focused in on being able to maximise the standardisation of the process and that key aspect of any good piece of research, that is the reproducibility. That someone like me can go along and actually do one of these things, and I believe I can, and I have, I think is actual testament that they achieved their goals. And some of these key features, I can pick up a meta-analysis or a quantitative review, and so long, when I see those numbers and I read the methods, if they've used any form of imputation or calculations, I should be able to go back to that raw research and find where those numbers came from. And in this methodology of synthesis, I can do exactly the same. This idea of extracting findings verbatim and categorising them on the basis of their similarity of meaning, that the themes that are running through them. But the real key feature of this was what came out the end, and where it was embedded in pragmatism, and that whole idea that we don't do systematic reviews and research just for our own purposes, but that link back to where these questions came from. that these were pragmatic synthesised findings to guide practice. It was not about creating new theory or some interpretivist methodologies of synthesis go. This was about getting down to how does this research, how does it benefit or my patient or not, and should we be using it? And concurrent with all of that, and some people, I know it was presented to the world, I guess, within a tool. And this one always confuses me. The synthesis approach is meta-aggregation. It's a meta-aggregative approach. But often people call it quarry, because concurrent with that came the tool to be able to do it, which at the time was novel and quite remarkable. That there was a tool there to help, just like as if you punch numbers into a statistical program or into a calculator, you could get your answer out at the end. This tool didn't throw the answer out, but it was a way to lead you towards it. And through that process of categories and synthesising those findings, to be able to conduct meta-synthesis of qualitative data. And many of you will be familiar with this style of output, with the findings that have been extracted directly from the papers here, the categories which based on its similarity of meaning, and similarly through to those synthesised findings to guide practice. That was a remarkable achievement, and this was back in 2002, I said, as when it first became available. And from this, almost immediately, and again here's some more of the heresy, was this idea that narrative or descriptive studies, so non-research papers, could also be used to inform practice. This idea of opinion, or specifically to inform policy. Born alongside that was another one of the tools in the summary suite, which was Notary, to synthesise text and opinion. And in the early reviews was always there as the backup plan that if you couldn't find qualitative research, there may have been text and opinion there to support that question, and the findings there from the experts could be synthesised in a similar fashion. But by 2006, now we had the means to synthesise evidence related to feasibility of an intervention, and certainly similar at that stage to Cochrane's RevMan, the ability to do statistics for comparative effectiveness, be it with dichotomous or continuous data. And this, again, in 2006 was a remarkable tool. It also had the template for writing systematic reviews, but it was, and I'm going to say now, I might be wrong, but the world first in being able to deal with multiple types of evidence within the one system. And essentially, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone trying to conduct a review this broad, but within one review you potentially could have meta-synthesised qualitative data, or from text and opinion, decision matrices around cost effectiveness, or cause relative effect estimates straight from randomised controlled trials or observational research in relation to the effectiveness of an intervention, all within the one tool or potentially within the one review project. And it was quite a remarkable vision and feat to bring this about. And you've seen now how this system has evolved into so much more than these four initial tools. Okay, so we've spoken a bit about where the early review sat, the development, and really where JBI was world-renowned and had its initial focus in terms of new methodology of synthesis in the qualitative research. But if we take a look back now to see what influence this had on the reviewers, well, as I mentioned, those very first reviews were very open and inclusive. Some were only looking at RCTs. They aligned directly to what a Cochrane review of effectiveness might look like. And some of them, as I mentioned, included qualitative studies within them to help inform that effectiveness. But I hunted around to have a look, and this, in 2006, and I remember hearing about these projects. Alan was telling me about them. I'm sure Kylie remembers them well. These projects, which I think were done for a nursing organisation in Canada. Yes. The first review published in the JBI library, there may have been others done for other organisations, commissioned work, published in other journals, I'm not sure. But in 2006, the first to use the quarry system. And moving through the archives, the first protocols. Now this, and I say this because when I joined the Institute in 2009, to me, I thought it was the norm that was continuing. But the first protocols to ask purely qualitative questions appeared in 2007. And the first review that used only query and notary on a purely qualitative question was published in that library in 2008. So not that long ago in the scheme of things when we talk about 20 years. And I couldn't help, I knew what I was going to be saying here, and I couldn't help but think about what Gerd Antis said earlier about sometimes how slow things move. There was that real evolution. We're talking about this methodology was developed around 2000, came on the scene, the software in 2001, 2002, and the first reviews to formally publish it were then some years later. Now, concurrent with reviews being published, software, new methodology, the other unique or remarkable thing about the Joanna Briggs Institute has always been there's always been an avenue for publication of the research. They were quite clear that JBI was going to do the full sweep in terms of providing evidence from where it started, from the clinical question, and certainly have the avenue to disseminate that research out to the healthcare and research community. And some of you may remember some of these journals. JBI Reports was the first I could find. I may be wrong. No, Zoe's shaking her head. She will provide comment later. JBI Reports in 2003, 2004, that evolved into the International Journal of Evidence-Based Healthcare. Craig also showed me this one last week. I didn't know it existed way back when. Evidence in Healthcare Reports, formerly Healthcare Reports, was another JBI journal. But certainly the one that we're all familiar with, and which for quite a long time was the major avenue for the dissemination of the work of all of us in the Institute, was the JBI Library of Systematic Reviews. And this was first appeared in 2006 with the Connect software, and then again still in 2009 with the Connect Plus software, and now today is currently available within the JBI at Ovid databases. Just hang on to that thought about the journals, because we'll come back to that, because you all know the story of the journals and they're an important part of the process. Now, concurrent with this development of methodologies and the like, back at the colloquium in Durban, I believe, a big decision was made in terms of support for our systematic reviewers who were conducting systematic reviews, and that was to form what was called the Collaboration Support Unit, which I think had a staff of 1 then. I think it was Vanessa Scott, and I think Cindy Stern might have taken the reins soon after that. By the time I arrived in 2009, there were 3 people working full-time at supporting reviewers, and they were organised in the regions, as the regions are organised today, but literally people on the ground who were supporting people conducting JBI reviews, and all working through that JBI model and the synthesis part of that program. And this support unit, most of the research staff of the Institute were under what we call one program, which was the evidence review program at the time. But they were busily beavering away, and reviews were starting to, now the collaboration was starting to produce more and more systematic reviews. Concurrent with all of this going on, not just the software, but the first manuals began to appear. So actually formal written pieces, I'm sure the Cochrane handbook was available at the time, but the first JBI handbook appeared to help reviewers who were conducting JBI systematic reviews. Some of you may be familiar with this, which I thought was the first edition of the Reviewer's Manual, until Zoe and Tiffany pointed out that no, in fact, there was one before it. So, but the first one that I was aware of. And a lot of our reviewers, unfortunately, also missed the fact that within the JBI summary guide, the user guide, that was not just a technical manual on how to use the software. The software and the methodologies were built so closely together. A lot of the methodology and its working parts was also built into that manual. And it was always a wonderful resource for reviewers. Every now and then I still pick it up myself. It's still on my shelf. I haven't thrown it out with crems, but it's still on my shelf, and I still refer to it because it's still a wonderful resource about the beginnings of a lot of our development, particularly the meta-aggregative synthesis. So the synthesis program continued to to provide guidance for reviewers, and this is a pretty critical year in the development of the synthesis program of the Joanna Briggs Institute. It was around that time, 2011, a lot was going on. There's always a lot going on in the Institute, but one thing that certainly was occurring was this, and continues to occur today, is this growth of the collaboration. So more and more people were engaging in systematic review, but not all of their questions matched what our guidance did and what our software did. The more people that got involved, when different sides of healthcare got involved, so a lot of the collaboration now isn't just involved in nursing practice, there's also a whole lot of allied health and even medical practice involved in the collaboration and who engage with us and our methodologies. And all these different groups brought different questions with them. And it was pretty clear at this time that if we wanted to continue working with all of these people in the way that we did, we were going to have to evolve with some of their new ideas also. Otherwise, they wouldn't find a home with us and we just end up pushing them away. So some of these questions about diagnostic test accuracy or the size of a disease, the prevalence of a disease state, but they weren't just issues about questions, also about different methods. And these types of reviews were filtering through the literature at this stage. So we have a question, but there are so many systematic reviews about this, or about this particular intervention. Now all of a sudden we were starting to see overviews and the like, and there was some demand from our constituents, how should we be doing this? So, as I said, back in 2011, a decision was made that this was an important part of JBI's program, and that's when the advertisement went out for the first Director of Synthesis Science, and it was the first step towards aligning the core programs of the Institute directly to the model that underpins everything that we do. And I was appointed to that position, but with that it really did indicate changing the focus of the Institute, and it gave us the opportunity as an Institute also concurrently with that, not just to drive everything from Adelaide, but we also formed, for example, our International Scientific Committee, where the methods that I'll speak about, and I'll mention again later, to involve people from the collaboration, because what we were developing here had a direct impact on all the users out there to actually be involved in the process as well, and to provide oversight of what we were doing. And another key part of this program is that at this stage, a lot of the research output, or most of the research output of the people in this room, was these systematic reviews. And there was a growing realisation that we needed a better mechanism to be able to get that work out where people could find it. Yes, it could go into evidence summaries and within our databases and the like, but also to alleviate some of the academic demands of those of us who are researchers and in academic institutions. And so there was a real push for the creation of this new online journal. And it went online on December the 18th, 2012, for those of you who needed that answer for your quiz last night. Immediately, within months, the first indexing appeared in the major databases. The first was CINAHL, soon enough was Embase and Scopus, and then in 2014, Medline, indexing in Medline as well. Now, I'm just going to take a step back, because this is really key. This thing here, this Lippincott book series, which are on sale just outside the door, that's actually a key part in this program as well. At this stage, we were about a year out from formalising our agreement with WK and Ovid. And for various contractual reasons, we couldn't launch straight away, but we wanted to make a bang and let the world know that this was going to happen. So I remember Alan sat me in the office one day and said, we're going to do a book series with Lippincott, and we're going to talk about the model, and we're going to talk about all wonderful things, and we need to be talking about synthesis and what should be done and what are important foci for synthesis. And if you go and have a look out there, those books were really the precursors. There are books about reviews of harms, diagnostic test accuracy, about etiology and risk factors, that weren't previously embedded in any of our manuals, in any of our systems. But once that series was out and about and gained in popularity with the JBI name on it, it really was a no-brainer that we actually should be providing some guidance and formalise some methods for our reviewers about how to be doing these types of reviews. And so from that, that was our aim, and we did. We brought together, within that synthesis science program, by the end of it, some 10 different groups had formed. And some of those groups revisited existing methodologies. The effectiveness group, for example, Catalan, who's the chair of that group, has added a lot of value in terms of statistical analyses and the like, and I'll speak a bit more about that when I talk about the latest developments, which I'll finish up on in just a few moments. But these groups went through their through the course of 2013, this was, and many of the people in this room were involved with lots of emails, teleconferences, lots of writing, face-to-face meetings, workshops at our 2013 convention, back and forth with the scientific committee to really formalise the guidance that we have today across all these different review types. So the original 4 that summary accommodated are there at number 1, 2, 3 and 7. And there's another 6 different chapters, essentially, that were created to support JBI reviewers. The beginnings of that program, and that was by 2014, so 12 months later those chapters have been produced to help our authors. That early beginnings, really the culmination of that first round of work of these groups was really in 2 places. The first was in the JBI International Methodology Symposium, which was in about September 2015, which I think many of you were probably there, and I thought was a fantastic meeting, to really focus in on this part of the work of the Institute. And the other was in a series of publications in the International Journal of Evidence-Based Healthcare at almost exactly the same time, I think also September 2015. And that issue is still there and freely available, and I really think that issue, having that methodology out there, it was certainly for that year and may remain so, I believe, some of the most accessed content in that journal. And with that, really almost the first time that we'd gone out and published the work in our synthesis methodologies out in the mainstream literature, recognition and knowledge about the Joanna Briggs Institute and who we are and what we do has actually become more and more apparent, certainly in the circles where we move. And I'll say outright, I'd always heard from Alan and from Craig, who've been attending Cochrane colloquia for many, many years, and often returning saying people still don't know who we are or understand what we do. I attended my first in Seoul just 2 weeks ago, and that was certainly not the case. People had certainly heard of us and were certainly beginning to understand what we do. And next year we have a fantastic opportunity at the Global Evidence Summit where 5 of these like organisations are coming together to really showcase more of the work of these methodology groups. It's a credit, I think, to all of the people who've been involved in really formalising this part of the work, this important part of the work of the Institute. So, Zach, I will be finishing, sorry. Just where are we today? Some of the latest developments. We've had 10, we're moving on to 11. I was just practicing this talk at lunchtime, and next to me, our latest psychometrics review groups are having their first group focusing on psychometric reviews and assessment tools used in healthcare and the review of these tools. We're meeting in the room next door. I mentioned some of the developments on the existing methods that we have. So those of you who tried a JBI review of effects, we use all different study designs, but it was always confounding reviewers that we had one appraisal tool for randomised controlled trials or or non-randomised studies. And similarly that we use the same tool for a prospective cohort study as we might use for a retrospective case control study. We've addressed that through the work of the effectiveness group. We now have 7 appraisal tools for those different study designs instead of 3. And we are now moving towards actually validating these tools as well through the course of the next year, which is an important step in formalising all of these methodologies. I'm not going to say any more. You've heard enough about the JBI summary software that supports all of this. But also importantly, I've spoken about the synthesis program. An incredibly important part of that hasn't been just about this is what a JBI systematic review should be. Aligned with that the whole way through has always been our capacity building. And I'll never forget when I first started teaching in 2009 when I first started teaching the CSR program. Alan sat me down and is there, if you want to deliver this program properly, remember one thing. We are not here to teach people what a systematic review is. We're here to teach people so that when they finish this week, they've got everything that they need to know how to do a systematic review. That's the aim of the game. And we've stuck to the guns on that. It's a remarkably effective program, and now there are training modules aligned to all of those different types of systematic reviews. We had a really interesting discussion with committee directors yesterday. We've got so much going on in synthesis. Is it time to consolidate some of this and turn our attention elsewhere? Probably. I know in some of those different review types there's some incredible movement going on internationally. Scoping reviews has just seemed remarkably popular. So in some areas I think we'll keep moving forward, in some we might consolidate, but I can just say in terms of, I know there will be in terms of scientific focus of the Institute, we're going to press on forward with making our mark, certainly in other programs, that is transfer and implementation. And on that point, Zach's nodding at me, hurry up. So thank you for your attention, and any questions? Thank you very much.